Good evening, everyone. I think we're just waiting for a couple of more minutes for everyone to join, and we will start thereafter. Good evening, and welcome to another exciting Catalyzing Change conversation. The event was conceptualized by Catalyst 2030, which is a fast growing global movement of people and organizations committed to achieving the UN sustainability goals by 2030. Catalyst 2030, NASE, which is National Association of Social Entrepreneurs, members constitute the Shift Narrative Working Group with the belief that there are current narratives, assumptions, and beliefs about our sector that need to be shifted or changed. This is the genesis of these conversations. ISDM, Sayok Foundation, and Catalyst 2030 are pleased to share the second edition of Catalyzing Change Conversations. Our topic for today, as the title suggests, are community-focused multi-thematic partnerships, the future of social change. We are looking to initiate dialogue on the possible solutions that the different players in the social sector, namely Samaj, Sarkar, and Bazaar, can bring to the table to create sticky change at scale. While the title of the session is self-explanatory, I would like to clarify that by multi-thematic, we do not restrict our conversations to collaborations happening across different domains like health, climate, education, and so on, but it can also be collaborations working across domains but have varied stakeholders. Before we continue, some housekeeping announcements. Please do mute your microphones to minimize background noise. If you have a question, please type it in the Q&A window, and we will open Q&A at the end of the discussion. If your questions are for a specific panelist, please do put their name in the question. Let me now go on by introducing the panelists for today. Our first panelist is Anant Bhagwati, who is a partner at the Bridgespan Group. He has abiding interest in enabling Indian nonprofits domestic philanthropy to achieve their full potential. He works closely with multi-generational families, technology entrepreneurs, corporates, global foundation, and has worked with 30 leading nonprofits in India on their journey for transformational scale. Our second panelist today is Aravindan Srinivas, who is the CEO of AVPN India and is a product director for South Asia. At his current role, he oversees strategy and delivery of programs in South Asia at the AVPN. Prior to this, he was with Dasra and has provided extensive capability building support to nonprofit leaders and philanthropists. Third in our distinguished list of panelists is Poonam Choksi. She's the head of social sector capability building at 88 Chandra Foundation. Her 15 years plus experience in corporate and social sector, and she has worked with large conglomerates to social startups. She specializes in scaling program operations and strengthening organizational capacity and measuring program impact. We unfortunately today, Gayatri has been pulled in and is unable to really make the discussion today. So we're very happy that Poonam has been able to really join us. And our final panelist for today is Uttara Narayanan, who is the co-founder at Buzz Women and director for Avantika Foundation. Avantika Foundation, which is at its nascent stage of building civic muscle of women towards community building problem solving. She is also part of a collaborative of 3 social purpose organizations that is currently looking at implementing holistic change at scale, more of which she will discuss today as well. And I am Sheena Gandhi, co-founder of Sahyog Foundation. Sahyog Foundation builds nonprofit capability to partner and facilitate collaboration to amplify impact. By working with people and partners, Sahyog aggregates learnings to improve organizational and programmatic efficiencies for scale and sustainable development. I will moderate today's session. Thank you, everyone. And I would like to actually first dive right in and ask my first question to Uttara. Uttara, can you, basis the collaboration that you're currently part of, can you share a little background with the audience today, as a lot of them are social purpose organization leaders? How should they really look at collaborations, and how do you make such collaborations work? Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sheena, and really lovely to be part of this conversation today. To dive deep into understanding, I think I've mentioned this before also, that there is no one formula for it, I feel. There are multi kinds of collaborations, and I've been part of at least 8 to 10 of them before this. Just to give a brief, this particular collaborative is of 3 organizations that are working to make citizens more active within their local democracy. But they're working with different stakeholders. So children, youth, and women. These are the 3 different organizations. And they are each working in different geographies, with different panchayats, with different districts, and they've shown impact in those places. But governance is such a space where if you keep on working in different places, you're not really shifting the needle, because all stakeholders need to be on board for the ecosystem to be moving towards that goal. And that's where we felt that we need to collaborate. And I think there's no magic bullet per se for collaboration. But I would begin with saying that it begins with the cause in mind, and not with let's collaborate, but to say what is the cause we are collaborating for. The second is the top leadership has to be on board for it. And also it's important that the agenda that each organization has, and it's true, right? Every organization comes with its own agenda, because of there is also constraints of what we've already agreed with a particular donor, with another partner, etc. But given all that, it's like focusing the attention through that magnifying glass, like how you get the sun's energy and then in a short period of time it causes fire, right? So that's what is required. I feel that in a short period of time, if people can come on board and say, okay, let's test it out. Also bringing in what you said about, the Bazaar, Samaj and Sarkar, bringing in that agility that Bazaar has showcased, bringing in that lean methodology that has been part of the recent talk in Bazaar, that how we can come together, because Samaj brings in the heart and the soul, but how do we bring in the hand and the head into the process, but in the same manner, not being too dependent on one particular organization. I think I'll stop now and hear other panelists, but I would say to begin with, I'm thinking that the cause should be at the center of it.
No, thanks, Uttara. I do agree that there is no magic bullet to it, but I think it'll be great to really understand 3 organizations in the same domain that you are all working in. 3 established organizations wanting to come together is really something How have you actually kept it together? You've spoken about leadership. Are there any other aspects that you'd want to share with the rest of the audience?
Definitely. And I think this is one thing I'm trying very different from the last 8 to 10 collaborations I've tried. And I made it very clear to the top leadership from the beginning that we are not trying to merge the curriculum. We are not trying to merge the processes and the styles of working. Because one of the organizations is 25 years old, the other organization is 12, the third organization is 10 years old. So it's too difficult to sort of make everyone to come on the same page in terms of that. But I said, can we actually have a mechanism where you keep it separate, but in the same geography, just have one sort of a line that cuts across, that there is one person. Let's say we're working with women, one organization, Avantika works with women, Reap Benefit works with youth, CMC works with children. How can we use the women to mobilize the children and the youth? How can the youth become the catalyst and go and deliver the program? So that is the only thread we are keeping. We are not asking the other, I mean, we are not making every organization change their M&E framework, because that ends up happening in a lot of collaborations, right? You have to relook at the M&E framework, come up with new outcomes. We're saying, no, we have established outcomes, we have established the impact. But in parallel, can we actually bring in this program, but in a particular geography, and have a clear-cut thing that in 3 years, we will showcase that these are the things that will change. And the collaboration happens to the outside, which is like the panchayat. The image that they get is that, oh, okay, the youth, women and children, all of them are talking the same language. They're all talking about participating. They're all talking about how active citizenship is important. And for that outside stakeholder, it becomes very important. Because for them, it seems like it's all same. But in the background, there are 3 different organizations working towards it. So I think that is what is different. And I feel, if you ask me, cause, leadership, and don't over-engineer the whole collaboration is what I would say.
And that's really how, while there are 3 different programs, 3 different organizations, what is the end stickiness in terms of change at scale that you want to be able to, as 3 organizations independently working across? The pilot is supposed to be for an X number of villages, right? What is the end objective that you want to be able to achieve through this collaboration? Because I'm assuming you have to align on those.
Definitely. See, I think that's where we began. We said, can we make these 100 villages, enable them enough to have active citizens across board, that they are able to get the local government to become accountable? And for that end goal to happen, what are the things that is required? And also in a way that in a set number of years, that there is no organization required anymore, because there are local leaders, whether it's women or youth, who have taken it up and they are able to move the needle forward. And for that to happen, how do we go about doing things? So I guess the stickiness is that it has to be local, it has to be local leadership, contextualized, and also that the end goal was, for all 3 organizations, by the way, these 3 words was very clear: active, resilient citizenship. So it became very easy to have that conversation.
No, great points, Atta. I think they're really well made. I do want to bring in Anant here to be able to really just sort of build certain perspective on what Uttara just said from a skills and competency standpoint that are required to make some of these SPOs, keeping the community at the center of what they do. And given that they're in the same domain, just the experience that Anant you've had in building so many, with working with not just philanthropy but also non-profit and organizations.
Sure, Sheena. Thanks, Uttara. I mean, it's very inspiring. How 3 organizations are coming together. In some way, let me just echo what Uttara said and then take it from there. I think the need to have certain, quite specific outcomes is quite important, because collaboration or collaboratives can very quickly become endless cups of coffee without a clear purpose. And many collaboratives lose their purpose. They start disintegrating because at some point people start questioning, because collaboration is very effort intensive. The costs of collaboration are actually hidden, but the cost of collaboration is actually the complexity, right? That's why people end up, there are very few examples of successful collaboratives over time. They start with a lot of energy dissipates. So just underlining firstly what Uttara said, which is like, what is the incremental value of this collaboration compared to all three organizations working separately? So I think that was, and I heard like that was almost done upfront. I do want to bring in the philanthropy perspective here, which is, while there's a lot of collaboratives happening, and especially post-COVID, the numbers have exploded. There are very few domestic anchor funders of collaboratives. Very, very few. That means almost all the collaboratives that you see are anchor funded by foreign capital. So that's one. That's a fundamental issue of sustainability. It's also a fundamental issue of like being proximate and close enough to people like Uttara who are doing the work to actually have that degree of trust and saying, look, I trust you. I trust you're doing great stuff. Go and use this money to the best of your ability. So as Bridgespan, when we looked at saying, okay, where is philanthropy in this journey of collaboratives? I think it's like there is some good news and there's some bad news. I think the good news is obviously there is way more collaboratives. 7 years back, there were 2, right? Now there are more than 20. And there are maybe another 20 in the conversations. So the good news is there is philanthropic interest in the topic. And the second good news is many of these topics are intersectional topics. So they talk about, gender. They talk about how to think about intersection between education and health, etc. But going back to, I think, what is going to be needed for people like Uttara to actually take ahead that energy is the 2 things philanthropy is lagging behind. One is really collaborative philanthropy still operates from a principle that I know the answer and I want to hold a very tight control on the answer, rather than saying I know the problem. I don't even say that I'm perfect at knowing the problem, but I'm going to take a bet on you as an individual who's close to the ground or people who are actually from that place, and I'm actually investing in you. So the investor mindset is very critical for philanthropic collaboratives to happen, especially the ones which have communities at the center. That's one. That's very, very rare. And the second part is really a decadal outlook. Nothing will happen if it's a community-led movement, especially intersections in less than 10 years. And saying like, okay, I want to see something in 3 years, like 3 years is going to take to build trust. And it is almost insane if a philanthropist is saying, I want to see outcomes. And by the way, this is my program, results framework. I mean, that's like, when you hear that, you again wonder about, okay, how is philanthropy so far behind this movement? So I think there is some good news and not so good news. And Sheena, I think this conversation, while of course there is some calls to action for NGOs and leaders like Uttara, I think there is also a call to action for domestic philanthropy. Thank you.
No, I totally agree with you, Anand, because we frequently, because we're nurturing collaborators, we frequently get asked this question on social return on investments. Okay, now just like you put, social return on investment for collaborators is not instantaneous. That impact takes a while. So tell me if you really had sort of advice to give to Uttara and a lot of the audience that was there. How do they make themselves more attractive while collaborating for funders to fund them?
It's a great question. I would say they're already doing all they can and should. Like, why should they be subject to a greater degree of scrutiny than, let's say, Paytm? So the point is, we should not fall into the trap of playing to the funders' gallery. I think as long as we are clear about, okay, this is a vision which is worthwhile, this is the problem statement, we are coming together, I think let the right funders come to you. The reality is, I think India is a few years behind, other countries in terms of accepting that doing everything oneself and having complete control is actually a myth. But let those right funders find you, because then I think it will be a fun journey. Because if the wrong funder joins the journey, it'll be both a painful journey for the delivery partner and the funder as well.
Uh, so I think you've given me a really good segue to really move to Poonam and ask her. Um, ADA Chandra Foundation has, over the last more than 2, 3 years, always really invested in building collaborative culture, building leaders that are a little bit more collaborative. You've also invested in water-driven, drought-driven projects. And of course, the work that you've done with the Maharashtra government speaks for itself during COVID. Um, have you really seen a shift in a mentality and a mindset of supporting community centric collaborators, and I think it's more a bottom up approach. So just would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Thank you, Sheena. Thank you, everybody, for having us here. And actually, great points made by Uttara and Anant on, the kind of skill set, mindset is required, and how philanthropy is still very solution focused and not problem focused. So I think what we have seen, I think post pandemic, one thing was very clear, that we have seen how NGOs have been able to reach the last mile that otherwise, we maybe knew theoretically, but we've seen that in action, as funders, as community. And we have been able to understand what it takes to understand local issues through the NGOs during the pandemic time. And that has brought about a lot of insights, to the, many funders that we speak to, and more trust in the, work that NGOs are able to do and reach, and also co-create solutions. I think what happens is, like, Anand rightly said, we go with the idea of, here is a solution, but we've nearly not co-designed that solution. And what we did when we did our Maharashtra work, with rejuvenation of water bodies, we have extensively worked with the communities and intermediaries to design solutions that's a win-win for Samaj, Sarkar, Bazaar, everybody. And I think more and more collaboratives or conversations we're having with our, peers is leading towards that, global systemic problems can only be solved with, last mile reach and, local mobilization of resources. So definitely I've seen that shift, happening in the community focused collaboratives. Other things that we have seen, the data is coming in much more. Like, I think what Britspan did, what CSIP did during COVID time, brought about a lot of issues that NGOs are facing in terms of their own financial resilience, which otherwise was not available in public domain. So I think that has led to more, honest conversations about how can we better support even the enablers of these community focused collaboratives, right? Unless the doers are empowered in the right way, how will they take this collaborative, or make it successful when they are themselves struggling for their own, survival? So I think, like, as a result, Grow was born, that is led by Edelgir. So definitely, I think there is a, clear understanding of the need at the ecosystem level and what support is required for the NGO community to become more resilient, and hence their impact on, these collaboratives. And also we've seen that more and more collaboratives are led by the intermediaries. I think whenever I've seen that it is led by an NGO community, I think the chances of it becoming a success is longer, or it has a lot of lag and challenges, versus it being led by an intermediary. So for example, if Grow is led by Edelgir, is, giving a huge impetus, versus if it has to be, and of course it's designed in a way, it's in a funder collaborative, where Samhita is leading the Revive, collective, but again, the anchor is an intermediary. So I think, I think the learnings from these collaborators will help pave way for the NGOs also to start building their own collectives and collaborators for the community issues that they are solving for. So I think, yeah,
those are, thanks, Poonam, but those are great examples of building capability of nonprofits, because I mean it's great that Grow has actually come in, but I think I think the collaboratives from a bottom up, keeping the community really at the center of it, and exactly what Uttara spoke about, that the community is going to take the ownership of this and working really with the sarkar or the panchayat level, and I'm getting down to the village level. I think driving non-profits, driving some of those is really, is there an understanding from, say, the funding community? And I'm talking about a very large sort of generalization to say, are the domestic funders, I'll get to the international funders later, are they aware? Are they involved to be able to nurture community-led collaborators that are working on the ground? And I'm not taking it away that building non-profit capability, because I think that's another ask, and that's really another topic of conversation as well. But Uttara, if there's any thoughts that you'd like to chime in with what Poonam just shared.
Yeah, so both what Poonam and Anand said makes a lot of sense from the perspective of one, the community base, which is very important, rather than it coming from a place, I would say, just above that, right, in a way, or away from it. And the other is the trust factor that Anand spoke about, that you have to build the trust in the community also for them to see and be collaborators. So I would also, actually, can I just reframe what I said? Maybe it is a collaborative of three organizations, but there is no collaboration without the stakeholder there, right? So the collaboration is with the women, children, and youth very much involved in the process of creating and designing. And thankfully, what Anand said in terms of community trust, see, given the location we have selected is something where, as an organization, Buzz has been working for almost 8 years now. So there is 8 years of trust that has already been built on other interventions that have happened. And we have seen the trust. And this came as an ask in a way, saying, all this is great, but there is more to be done. How do we do that? How do we get that done? And they needed the tools and the skills and the knowledge for it. And I would say that is where the design began. It is not the other way around. And it's very important for us to remember that collaborative is, yes, we're all thinking, there's this us versus them kind of thing, right? That we are designing something, but it is not. The community needs to design it. They might not have the tools for it, which is what is an exposure we are providing, the tools. But finally, they are designing it. And I'm sure that is what the design of the curriculum is also in our collaborative as well.
No, thanks. What I do want to do is try and bring in, now we've had your perspective, we've had Anand's perspective as well as Poonam's. I think I'd like to bring in Arvind to really, we've seen really a global trend of collaborators for decades, to be really honest, as well as of funding collaboratives. And international funders have actively really discussed collaborations and partnerships for a very, very long time. Now, AVPN recently has also become very active. I'm sure that they were already to hold such discourses as well as discussions on the need for collaboration, and to be able to really amplify impact, as well as leveraging what I think, Anand, you mentioned about intersectionality in social investments, right? So my question really, Arvind, to you is, just from your experience, how can the Indian funding community initiate dialogue amongst themselves and collectively sort of discuss new ideas, share views, align towards really supporting community-based, say, multi-thematic collaborations in the sector?
Yeah, sure. Happy to be here, Sheena, first of all. So thanks for inviting me, and thanks to the ISDM and the Catalyst team as well. I want to pick up on where, Uttara left off, this whole aspect of, before we go to influence the funders, I think that the legacy of philanthropy has been, program design has been very outside in, right? The capital decides the design of the program. It hasn't been, inside out from the life of the person that we are trying to impact. So, one of the real ways in which this became very stark was during COVID, and we were asking people to stay indoors, saying health is important and all of that. And there are people there saying, look, we don't have means of livelihoods. So you're asking me to wash my hands and there's no water supply and you're just staying indoors. It doesn't really take into account the ways in which all of these themes are actually coming together when you put the person at the center of all of this change, right? So livelihoods, health, everything is very, very closely interlinked. And I think, that the terminology Anant used, right, around intersectionality. So the first need from a funding community perspective is to start looking at design from the inside out, saying, look, which community are we really trying to change, and making sure that you take on board and cede power to those communities to then decide how change has to happen, and and what change needs to happen. The question around outcomes, so to speak, right? If you were to apply this to oneself, even when you have a bank account, you don't want 5 different people calling you. You want one relationship manager to whom you go to for whatever you need, and they translate, do everything, because that's the person with whom you hold the relationship and the trust. And the community-based organizations are those equivalents, right? For people in the in the front lines. These organizations are essentially the backbone. So if you look at the future and the question around multi-thematic, it makes it simpler for funders, because it's easier to specialize in a specific vertical, but unfortunately, social change isn't as vertical driven, right? Our government programs are also very verticals and missions driven. But when you look at change isn't vertical. It's very, I wouldn't even say horizontal. It's very, cyclical, right? It moves around and you need to keep changing. So when you look at funders who've adopted that approach, they have done a much better job of understanding the cost of not collaborating, the cost of not fostering these partnerships. I would say, some of these funders are really, the examples. And unfortunately, the domestic philanthropic segment hasn't stepped up to the level that they should have, given that they're actually much more closer to the ground and they see the impact of all of this. And I think that's an ongoing journey. I think the second part is, also when you spoke about the social return on investment, right? Having this multi-thematic approach automatically reduces the risk of ego clash or insecurities that come with competencies. Say now one is very clear what is group A bringing versus group B versus group C, and as long as there is mutual respect and value for all the capabilities that each of these actors are bringing in, it's much easier to make the case. But making the case is not enough, right? When funders really want to understand this, those who have done this really well have understood that this is a means of better feedback loop. Which means, for instance, if you take climate change, right? Like you might be a livelihoods focused funder, but if you don't understand the impact of climate change on migration, or the impact of water tables decreasing and therefore migration happening, and the impact of that on children dropping out of schools or security, right? So those who have that learning mindset, I think, are able to do this much better, because they understand, again, the cost of not collaborating and not fostering these partnerships. But to do this also, both funders and organizations, I know, Poonam, you are referring to this, but the backbone capability has to be built, and that's a muscle, right? And you need to exercise that muscle. It won't appear out of nowhere. You need to give people the leeway, the flexibility to fail, to do things, and it's okay if 5 out of 10 fails, but the risk of not doing it is so much greater. There's like a 90% chance that the program outcomes will fail, right? That's worse than a specific partnership or a project failing. So in my experience, I think local funders, some of the individuals have been able to take that risk appetite better, but that has happened in much smaller partnerships when it's one-to-one. When it's multi-thematic, I think it's very, very hard, because that requires a lot of effort, and one person to just, or one organization to just put their entire mind space and dedicate it towards that purpose. So I'll just pause there.
No, Arvind, great points. I think what I'd like to really delve a little deeper into is just to understand AVPN works across different South Asia markets. Have you seen certain trends that have worked in those markets because it's South Asia that could be sort of used in the Indian market context?
Yeah, I think overall as as a region, I think Asia also, I'm trying to understand this now. I'm just a couple of months into the system, and I see that it is also pretty different. It's not very easy to bucket all the Asian countries in one specific way, but the maturity of the overall ecosystem is actually growing. And I say that because when we launched, and with the collaborative funds, those are the first effort at bringing funders together to say, look, this needs to be concerted effort, right? And there are a couple of things that we had to do to make sure that that exercise sees through the purpose that it was meant to do, which was having a very clear governance mechanism, having these funders have a say, but also having bringing in people who will then also be able to influence the funders in their own learning. So that was a very important aspect of it. I think some of these larger funders are actually present across multiple countries and regions. So there is no reason why they can't, they have to behave very differently in one country versus another. And I think that's a very, very high value prop for funders to bring in their learnings into other regions as well. I think the second part of it is, and I mentioned this before, funders who are looking at topics in a much more complex way have actually fostered this better. And those funders are actually, regional funders. They fund multiple regions. So they see the same story playing out, and therefore they've learned and they have been able to, make more sophisticated choices. And essentially they are all taking longer term bets. I think that is the key to any of this happening. Across Asia, the challenges are very starkly visible, right? They are very common. The patterns are common. The floods in Pakistan right now, or the challenges in Bangladesh, or the challenges in Sri Lanka, for instance. The region is all going through very similar crises, right? And for us to be able to work on these things together, it is going to take a lot of soul searching and actually, instead of just patching things up and working on just fixing the system in small pieces, there has to be a radical shift away from this outside in approach to say, can we go to the communities and really just ask them how they want this change to happen? And I think that's true in a couple of these maturing economies. Indonesia is making a lot of steps in that direction. We see a lot of steps in the direction by Vietnam. And like I said, South Asian countries are also actually quite sophisticated. Bangladesh and India are actually much more complex than many of the other Asian countries as well. So there's a lot for us to learn from each other.
So just to really build on your answer, and I want to actually ask Anant and Poonam, how much of a lot? So India as a country is vast, right? We can literally between our north, south, east, west, it's diverse, it's vast. How much do the funders in India, allow? We are all aware of the issues and how multi-layered they really are. How much do the funders today really allow for failures to actually happen? And how is it that we can actually change such mindsets? Just building on what Uttara also said, that she's failed at this multiple times and still realized that she wants to do this. How many of the funders today would be willing to actually imbibe that and go along with it, as a lot of the South Asian funders have? So, Anant, Poonam, any one of you?
So, one thing that I've seen and believe strongly the power of collectives is that, the risk is shared and divided among so many stakeholders. So I think there is so much merit in being a part of the collective, because then your share of failure is limited. But when the returns are generated as per the outcomes that, the collective is designed for, the ROI is exponential, right? Because it's, allowing for you to scale your operations at length and breadth that you otherwise independently with a single organization would not have been able to do. So, like in many collaboratives that we are co-funding currently, right, whether it's capacity building or, community driven, a contribution fair is so limited. It's astonishing, but the kind of returns that we are able to see through that. So I feel like this is a great way to actually share the risk, amongst, donors. So I think the appetite is much more in a collective than actually independently, in an NGO when they're supporting. So I think one has to understand that it's very different ballgame. And like earlier we've reiterated this, when you talk about failure, one is, and not directly related, but yet connected point is the unit of implementation when it comes to scaling the operations of a collective is very important to define. One can look at saying we work in 50 districts, and have scattered impact versus, having concentrated impact in, limited geographies. And we have seen that, whether it's collectives or collaboratives or, any group working together to solve a common issue or a, common problem at hand, more and more, because we are working with the government and they are also asking us to redefine our unit of implementation. So earlier when we worked, we were working in multiple districts, but like 2 districts in a state, and they're saying that's not how you'll bring about a significant change, and if you want partnerships with the government or, and we've seen that both other funders and government are very interested in concentrated change. How can you exhaust a geography, with the problem at hand rather than it being, scattered scale. So I think if one can really keep that in mind, I think, one can find solutions to share the risk as well, So I think those are my 2 points. And Anand, you can add to that.
Sure. Yeah. No, I agree. And I think the picture is not all bleak. So if you look at the numbers, right? So there is about $16 billion, which is the private philanthropic capital in India. Roughly half of that would be the combination of domestic, right? HNI, CSR, etc. Now, CSR is driven so much by regulations, but still there are some CSR who are more futuristic, who are thinking of collaboration, right? Even if you look back, like Mahindra, the Nandhi Kali, actually a large part, more than 50% of Nandhi Kali funding actually is not from Mahindras. So that's pretty interesting, right? Because they are not fixated on having the brand on the name. But I think the HNI point is very key, like what Poonam mentioned, like places where HNI has endowed a foundation or given that backing, whether it's ATCF, whether it's Zerodha, Rain Matter, those are the places where some of these changes are starting to happen. It today might be 5% of the total pie, but I think it's a very vocal, very it's a role model 5%. There is very strong mind share of that 5%. Now the question is, how can this conversation catalyst some of this, take that 5% to a much larger number? The wealth is there, the intent is there. I think it's more about having those conversations to say, how can some of this start? Usually, just like in collaborations, usually the first few years we'll see 1, then there'll be 2, and then there are 20. It would not be surprising if the same trend happened in domestic philanthropy also. So we do have the 1 and 2 and 3. But now the question is can we double down to have the large number? And like Arvind said, can we avoid the mistakes which have happened in the West? So can we actually start community first? Can we be long-term? And in some ways, can we make sure we don't fixate too much on the success? The whole concept of success means there's no risk. If there's 100% success, actually, it's like a terrible idea. So, how can those learnings happen in domestic philanthropy? But it's very possible, I feel. Yeah.
But having said that, while it is possible, and I think COVID has sort of pushed a lot of funders to really come together and fund certain relief work, etc., etc. But and I think an evolution of those were also the Grow Fund, etc., which was really building into the capability of the nonprofits that were not existing. I think when philanthropy or donors, individual donors, take really the role of an anchor, do you really think, and I want to ask Uttara this question, do you really think the social purpose organizations such as yourself have enough freedom to do what you want to do?
Put me in the spot.
No, I mean,
It's difficult
to be able to really
the
have
way I
this
look at it. So I'm going back, let me go back to the experiences I've had, right? I never raised for a collaborative before. We had raised money for the outcomes we had already presented to the philanthropy. And then we wanted to collaborate because, I mean, it's in our DNA. All NGOs want to collaborate. Like, it's the wrong thing to say that we don't. We really want to work with others because we work with communities. We know there is a need. And each time I've tried working with the nonprofits, what ends up happening is that it ends up to a point where we say, yeah, we want to do this together, but at the same time, I've agreed to this to my donor, and they will say, I've agreed to this. And how do we sort of manage it within the bandwidth that we have and agree to what we do, plus do so? So this ends up becoming a side project at the end of it. That's why this particular collaborative, when I started, I said, it will not be like that. Let's design something where we go to a funder and say, hey, it's not going to be a side project. This will be the main project where all three of us are going to work together, and will you support? And I think the philanthropy has to have that, the guts to get into it. Otherwise it can't. Because we are saying it will be long-term, it will be concentrated. We're not going to do 100 districts in like 2 districts there and here. We're saying concentrated, one taluk, by the way. We have picked one taluk, not even a district. We said one taluk, 100 villages, so that we can actually see the needle shift. And this is how you'll see the needle shift. You need a critical mass finally, right? To really see social change happen. And how will you see that critical mass? And for that, you're right. I mean, when we go to, if there is a collaborative where each NPO is going back to their particular donor and asking funding for it, then the 2 different donors who are involved also have their own agendas, their own, what they have to present to their committees and their boards and their managements. And that becomes problematic.
I want to bring in Poonam here. Okay, just from what Uttara has just shared, what is the funder perspective when somebody comes to you like this? And I think I'd love to also hear Arvind's point of view after you.
So, you know, what we, talking example of our, you know, own work with the water bodies in Maharashtra, and, you know, it's a complex process. You know, when there's so many stakeholders to manage, there are so many expectations to, you know, deal with. There are so many ego clashes that play a role, and everybody is working from individual interest. Right. So while we talk about purpose being at the center, we have to constantly pull everybody to, here is the purpose, you know, the central purpose that we are all, you know, trying to solve for. So I think what has worked is in a good governance system. And we have also learned along the way, right? I mean, earlier we started with, okay, here is the solution, you know, here is how we work with the community. But then we co-created the solution to make it win-win for all. But then who's going to manage all of this, right? And we, as a, you know, funding agency, are very hands-on with the implementation, but NGOs are more on the service delivery part, although we don't see them as vehicle for, you know, doing the implementation, but there are a lot of energies is going into implementation of work on the ground. So who's going to actually mediate this, you know, conversation of success, learnings, challenges, you know, and we don't have that, right? I mean, there's a group of funders who come together to solve, but no, there's no communication. And we see having a governance structure, having a PMU of sorts is very, very critical, you know, to build this communication channel between, you know, different stakeholders, and constantly align with the purpose and the outcomes, you know, of the journey. So I think that's very critical to making it successful. And we've seen that more and more people who come to me with, you know, ideas of collectives and they want to fund. And I'm glad that they come with the idea of, you know, PMUs. So I know somebody in UP, they're working, you know, on forming collective. They already have a COVID collaborative that they have formed, you know, to solve for, you know, COVID challenges, but now they want to, you know, evolve into making it a community development project focused on education and health. So the first thing I said, who's going to manage, who's the governance, you know, what is the governance? And they said, okay, can we get money for PMU, you know, funding for PMU? I said, sure, that's a good start, you know, because then, you know, somebody has to hold everybody together. So who is that somebody has to be clearly defined, and the role responsibility with clear agenda and communication, very critical.
So what I'm hearing, Poonam, from you is, one, having either an intermediary or a program management unit just to be able to balance out, say, the power dynamic, if I may take the liberty of actually saying that, to be able to balance between not just the organizations that are sort of working together, but also the donors. And they could be one donor or 10 donors that could be supporting such a collaborative movement. Arvind, is there a different structure that you have sort of noticed in your years of experience, which could possibly be potentially be adopted to encourage community-based sort of collaborations for change?
Yeah, so I think the underlying theme of governance is the key, but how it manifests it has to be fit for purpose, right? So if it's a single funder, then the decision making is with one person, or like whatever is the key program manager there. So then it becomes simpler. But if this is an intent to bring in multiple funders, right, and each of the NGO partners might be going to different funders to pitch it. So it's important that there is a common steering group that actually, is also aligned that, look, this is happening and this is strategic and this is going to give you a lot of leverage as well to your intended outcome. So that's the first part, that there has to be over communication with that group so that they see the process of change happening and not just the reporting cycles and whatnot, because then it gets into, this money, what specific line item is it going to fund? And that's a very uncomfortable conversation because you don't really know how this is going to pan out. You need that space. The second thing is that I think there are, and I have seen this now, that there are a lot of funders who are coming up with consortium grants, which is they are actually encouraging multiple people to apply as a consortium. And I think in this case, it's maybe one funder, it might be multiple funders pooling in money into one fund, but consortium grants are also becoming a reality. I think that's one way for nonprofits to also tap into, where of course there will need to be a lead partner who's going to take accountability for bringing everybody together to manage the whole, this thing. But we have seen Mahagathbandhan's work, so I don't see a reason why not. Sorry, that's all I had. Anant has his hand up.
Anant? Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I guess this is also a bit of a reflection on, I think, Uttara, what you were saying earlier, and Arvind, like, there's such an opportunity to focus on the right kind of collaboration. Like, if we look at Jan Sahas, for example, this was an organization which actually at some point maybe impacted 5,000 people, right? And right now the goal is at a very different level, right? Thinking about 10 million vulnerable migrant workers. I mean, at some level, if all the collaboratives are run by intermediaries, there will be yet another power imbalance in the system. There is already a power imbalance in favor of funders. Now, with FCRA coming in, there is the same power imbalance actually is transmitting in favor of intermediaries. And as an intermediary myself, like, I would hope there'll be, like, the next 20 collaboratives will actually be founded by nonprofits, CBOs who are actually close to the ground. It's fine if, they're like very, very, very not polished. Today, many of the collaboratives are founded by people who have gone to very great schools, like very good at communications, right? English communications. But is that the skill set which will solve India's issues? Most likely not. So then the question is, what can Catalyst do to enable people who may not be that great at English comms, but are close to the ground, have that trust, like Uttara said, and after the next few happen, I mean, maybe, Sheena, that's the capacity building which is needed, because we don't want yet another power imbalance to actually replace a existing power imbalance. Thank you.
No, I think you make a really, really valid point, Anant, and we've actually always tried to encourage that internally, because Sayog is by itself not a program management unit. The idea, and linking back to, I think, a point you made earlier on sustainability. How is it that you can make community-centric, collaborative, sustainable? Is it going to be with a collaborative or a network of funders? Is that going to enable, or are they just cogs to be able to make the movement actually happen, the collaborative movement that will make change happen at a more sustainable level? And I think you make a valid point. We don't need another 100 intermediaries to come in and say, you know what, we'll manage the collaborators. Whereas in a collaborative of well intended social purpose organization leaders, to be able to take that as an ownership, and with the transparency and the trust, and keeping the communities really at the center of it, and drive that change. So I think it's really a valid point. I do want to hear from Arvind and Poonam on the point that Anand actually made on actually encouraging that as a.
Yeah, I mean, if I were to, I mean, there's no to this question, right?
Yeah.
That's like the inevitable future of it.
Exactly.
However, it's going to be a journey. I think
Yeah.
nonprofits are
That's
learning how to partner. Funders are learning how to therefore be a better funder, not just to one organization. Now I have to be a better funder to many. So maybe the power dynamic changes in this case, and therefore, the change happens faster. I mean, so I think the winds of change are actually in that direction. At least in my experience, what I have seen is that lots of nonprofits have actually taken the charge. They are much more influential right now. They've seen the power of collaborating for advocacy. They've seen the power of collaborating for better negotiation with even funders, and also actually, honestly, just achieving the basic impact that we're trying to do. It's the odds of achieving that goes that much higher, right? So people are getting more inspired by that narrative.
No, completely. I think eventual future, I just want to add that, one needs to really learn from what these 20 collaborators are doing and build templates and role models and, amplify and disseminate that. I think we are a huge believer. If we see any work that we do, we want to replicate and not us being the owner. We want the government to take the ownership. We want the community to take the ownership. And a big part of our work is, apart from doing service delivery and, change on the ground, is building the templates and, and building the capacity of the communities to lead it, forward in the future. So definitely, I think we are already designing it for it in our collaborative, engagement with partners. And so is, and which is why I think the point that I made earlier about building the capacity of the NGOs is very critical, and take these learning templates to them and say, if you had to run this, how and what, and they will have to, of course, adapt it, because it won't be the same. Because I know they don't have the resources currently. You'll be talking all of this, like Uttara, I'm sure, I don't know how much time stretch you are, already putting to make this collaborative work. And is it getting funded for that time that you're putting into, additionally support this? Now, nobody is claiming for that and nobody is raising fund for that. So while you may, raise funds for the actual problem statement or, the work that you're doing on the ground, but who's going to pay for the time? And that's why I think intermediaries are leading this, because they can, somehow, like, and then for the lack of it, that they're professionals to run this. So they kind of are able to raise that money for their own management. I think for NGOs, I think they will, once they learn the formats, like how Uttara is running it, we'll get there, definitely. I think once we know how, they're confident enough to ask for that. I don't think there is running away for the funders from that.
No, thank you. So I'm going to do a quick time check, because I think we're already 6 o'clock. So before we really get into Q&A, I want to ask each of you, just how do you feel that the Samaj and the Bazaar can really work together to address the social issues before we really get the Sarkar into the fold? And I think this is really a leading question from what Poonam has just really shared, to say that eventually there is some levels of sustainability that have to be there, some levels of templates that have to be, they have to really be able to take the ownership. So happy to start with Uttara, Anand, Arvind, any one of you.
Sure, I can go. What I really liked, what Anant also said in the beginning, was the cost of the collaboration, right, which is hidden and complex that he mentioned. Coming from the NGO perspective, what happens is we are working from the level of heart and soul, and we end up forgetting this. What Poonam just asked me the question, right? I'm sure you're stretching right now. All of us are. And but the thing is, when I think of women in Bagur who recently got their ration shop made because they finally found out that, oh, this is the process to it. So for me, that gives me the energy. So the impact is where we are finding that energy, and the cost is pretty high, right? What for me Bazaar will bring in is to bring in that question up front, saying, hey, what's the cost of this? You need the head to keep coming back to that question. You need the head to keep coming back to governance, not just work from the emotional point of view, which comes very easily to us, and we keep going back to a default. Because we are coming from inside the community. We are working with them day in and day out, and none of this really matters, because finally it is about how much time they're spending walking 25 kilometers to ration shops every month to get their ration, and that's what hits us first. So I feel where Bazaar comes in is to bring in that technical expertise, bring in that structure in place, templatizing it, standardizing things, and to say, hey, how can we find these efficiencies rather than keep doing it over and over. And where Samaj will come in is to bring in the emotional perspective, to say, no, this is important. There might be times when we have to let go of efficiency and structure because that is what the community needs. And Sarkar is, I feel, already involved in so many ways. Anganwadi teacher is involved, Asha worker is involved, the panchayat is involved, the members are involved. So at the community level, I don't think NPOs are really seeing how do you bring in Sarkar, because Sarkar is already there. We've been working with Sarkar for way too long. From the, I'm talking grassroots perspective, that is, we are not doing advocacy. When we are community-based organizations, we are doing more of the on the day-to-day basis, working, advocating for rights at that level. So yeah, that would be my take. Thank you.
So there are, I think, definitely large examples actually happening, right? If you take the skill development initiative, the NSDC bond, I think blended finance is one way in which people are realizing different risk appetites, different partners, and different capabilities, and therefore the necessity to work together for outcomes. That's one big example that I've seen. AVPN is also currently working with the national government and with KPMG on water and sanitation in a similar way, saying, there are models of service provision in WASH for which government may not be the right service provider, but might be the right person to hold the accountability. But can we get private sector actors, and therefore can we de-risk them with philanthropic capital? Can we then bring in market capital to enable growth for these organizations? I do think that these changes are happening. I think, like I said, the winds are moving in the direction.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like Uttara said, government has already been part of this. I think if we take a little bit of an analog to the for-profit world, who's the seed funder is the real question. The market investor is already there, which is the government. They collect our tax rupees, and then they invest. So the seed funders in any situations are usually people who have complete control over their money, which is essentially private philanthropy. And I think if that part of the equation falls, so in some way, market, the bazaar or government are the two potential market investors, right? For some topics, they will be the government. For some topics which can be monetized, it's the market. But if the seed investors come in, many of this, and Uttara's point, there is so much energy, passion, and this is almost being done on their own time and dime. If this can be actually articulated, like you said, the templates are there, Poonam, and then it can be replicated, I think that would be powerful. But I think what it needs is to acknowledge this needs a lot of effort. And of course, then a little bit of the support has to be provided for some of the community-led collaboratives to actually start the journey. Thank you.
No, thank you. So I'm going to pause here now, and we're going to take a few questions from the audience. I know we're running a little behind time, but my apologies for that. So we have how the collaboration contributes in incomes of tribal, small and marginal farmer in central India belt how the quality of life choices could bring in the remotest section of the tribal community. Uttara?
Sorry, no experience at all working with the tribal belt. My expertise is working with women, and I'm not working on. So this, I feel the question is on whether this collaborative. So this collaborative that I'm working on is not working on income generation. It is about. So let me just summarize it. It is about enabling the community to find their voice and voice it. It could be with anything, as long as the community is the one which is voicing that opinion.
So I'm going to move to the next question. It talks about the FCRA amendments. How can we mitigate the hassle for collaboration in India with like-minded organizations working together, as the FCRA funders give the grant to only one NPO, and the current FCRA amendment restricts the scope of collaboration, which is primarily sub-granting?
I can take that with a two-word answer: domestic philanthropy.
Well said, Anand. Well said. What is the risk of investor-supported community collaboration leading to long-term conspiracy of modern-day slavery? Won't this lead to even more income inequality?
That seems more like a rhetoric question, I think. But I do think the sector is now facilitating these dialogues, right? The hard conversations are happening, and this needs to happen even more.
So I have a question from Joanna, who represents the Partnership Brokers Association. They build capability of and support individuals who facilitate multi-stakeholder collaborations with a particular focus on ensuring community voice. Her question is to the donors. What is the emerging opportunities for devoting financial decision-making to the ground level implementation staff so that initiatives can truly be community driven? Would you like me to repeat that?
No, I think
what are the emerging opportunities for devolving financial decision making to the ground level implementation staff so that initiatives can truly be community driven?
So one thing that we have seen, what we are trying to do a lot is work using data with the communities a lot, So I think when we, said there's a problem at hand, there's a solution that we co-created with the community. And we also, clearly call out what targets we are, trying to achieve, what milestones we want to achieve, and hence what is the kind of financial contribution it will lead to from our end to achieve those milestones. And we have, worked with a technology partner to develop an application, which is very, and we do a lot of capacity building. So I think the key is not only what happens is all these data-driven decisions are made, on this side of the, line, which is where the funders come in or the intermediaries coming. And I think the NGOs just are looked at as vehicles of implementation. We completely work the other way around. We co-create solution, we co-create targets based on, understanding the geographical context, cultural context. And then we co-create the financial, contribution to support those implementation. And we also build the capacity of the partner to understand data and technology. And they are the one who's feeding the data to us. So what we just do is take that data learnings, build insights out of it, and then take it back to them and say, here is where we are, here is what we've achieved, here is what our successes are, here is where we've not been able to achieve. And hence, then agree on the financial contribution. And I think so far we've not seen any, because they have the ownership of feeding the data, and that's what helps. So I think it's very important to build those, co-create those milestones, build the capacity to read, understand, analyze data, and take the insights to them, for, agreeing the financial part of it. I think that really helps to build a productive collaboration and a win-win for all. And most of the community partners that we work with have been repeated over the years. So we've seen that they've seen the trust in the way we operate and the transparency with which we operate. And there's a lot of trust. So for example, our team is definitely monitoring the program on the ground. So, but they say we've, desilted a certain amount of geography and water bodies. We trust that while there is some amount of monitoring that happens. So I think it's a trust partnership. But building systems, that helps us to have a dialogue using that, rather than it being very what I think and what you think. So I hope that helps.
Thanks, Poonam. So I think there's one last question from Dheeraj. The moment we involve government bodies, there's a lot of friction, bureaucracy and inconsistency comes into picture due to the way the government body works, or the change in policies due to the change in party that is in power at that time. How sustainable do you think systems can be when we exclude government bodies? What limitations do you see of that system?
Can I just say that this is true for NGOs, this is true for corporates also. Managements change, CSR committees change, the founders move on. So I don't think this is particularly true only for the government bodies. It's true for any kind of system, any kind of organization, and we just have to work within that. One of the ways to make it more consistent is to make sure there is a signed MOU, or there is some relationships built beyond that one person that you're talking to. One of the things we keep saying is always build relationships across the local government, state government, everywhere. It's not that you're just working with one person, right? Or one team. There are multiple people who are involved, and not like the entire team is going to change. We just accept that it is a reality and work along with it or work around it.
So I'm going to just close now. Quickly, I think it'll be great to hear just from the panelists on quick insight on the way forward that they see for multi-thematic, multi-stakeholder, community-based collaborations. So just last thoughts from each one of you would be appreciated. Uttara?
Sure. Again, I guess what I said, that start from the community, start from the cause. What is really required for a collaborative to be present? A collaboration not just for the sake of collaborating, but from the outcome in mind, and not to have too much dependency on one particular organization when it's a collaborative, because I also see that happening, that one becomes the distributor NGO or the service delivery NGO, and that causes a lot of trouble. And also have that sustainability plan in terms of the community. At what point is the community totally taking over? And also having a shared responsibility on paper. I think somebody asked about costs and how do you apportion it? I'm like, from the beginning, have those conversations from the beginning on what are the costs, what are the roles and responsibilities, and who's going to take up that. And I feel at some point the donor also has to, or the funder also has to be part of that conversation. Right now, what's happening is the NGOs have the conversation, go to the donor and present. I feel that the funder, the community, everybody has to be part of that conversation to co-create the entire thing together. And that what will be the most useful for a collaboration. Thank you.
Poonam?
Building on to what Uttara said, I believe, we talk a lot about trust, that the funder should be trusting. Definitely, I think that's very important, very, frequently said, but I think that what would be also good that, even the community-based organizations or NGO partners should trust with the funders with the intention. I think they don't know the how part of it, so they will make your life miserable till they figure out the how. Just bear patiently with that process, but don't stop the education and capacity building of the funders. So while we as a peer funder will do that from our end, we do talk about it, in the forums, but it's not only us, right? Everybody will have to take that ownership. go with the idea that, we trust this funder with the intention, but we'll educate this funder on how to do this right. So keep that. Don't get frustrated. It's a long journey. We're all in this together, so we'll make it work for all of us. But everybody has a role to play.
Anand, Arvind?
Yeah, I mean, I think nothing new from my side. I think just reiterating what I said before and what I've heard from everybody else is, we'll need to facilitate a joint journey, right? This process has to be seen as a joint journey, and if that outcome, if we want to see these outcomes in our lifetimes, we need to really listen to what the community says are their priorities and how they would like this change to happen. And as long as that safe space is created where funders are actually listening, they are getting the real insights from what is the priority and how change needs to happen. I think NGOs can also start being more learning focused than output focused, and meeting contractual obligations. And it does need to happen that the power equation is highly skewed right now. So one can't put too much of the onus on just the NGOs to just speak up. I think funders have to cede power before they can expect nonprofits to be able to actually talk about the true cost of not working together, because the cost of failure today is very high. A funder walks away. So the cost of failure needs to be brought down for NGOs to really say, look, how do we make this better? That's all.
Thanks, Arvind. Anand, last words. Last wise words.
Yeah, no, I think not wise, but exciting. Excited that this is happening. I mean, one goal which could be there, which I think Poonam also said, is look, there are already the early adopters like ATCF, Ronnie, like Swadesh, or Azim Premji. Like they have changed their model fundamentally to actually be much more like listening, being proximate to the community. I guess how can we do a little bit of what Arvind is saying, which is not put too much of the strain of this on the NGOs. Because on top of running an organization, and that's why intermediaries are doing so much more. But if Catalyst can actually think of like who are the next 3 philanthropists who will make unrestricted, collaborative, oriented grants to seed fund this. Seed fund means take care of the time which it takes to think about some of this. Don't worry about the program. The programmatic funding actually has enough takers, but who's actually going to fund the time, the seed funding of the time? I think that could be transformative, and that can be, either directed at one individual or organizations, or even held as a group. But I think in some form, my call to action is creating a small seed fund for collaborative effort by NGO leaders. Otherwise, at some point, it becomes hard to sustain. Thank you.
No, thank you so much. I think it's been a really, really interesting and insightful discussion from each one of you. I know I may have put a few of you on the spot, but really just trying to really deepen the understanding on collaboration, and that's really the agenda of this. I believe that this conversation is a really needed one, and we're glad that you've been able to give us so much time. We do hope that more stakeholders in the sector need to be able to realize that collaboration has the true potential to positively bring about positive impact. The problems in India are plenty, and keeping really communities at the center of what we do must come first and foremost. What we will do is enable innovative thinking, such as exactly what you were, Anand, Poonam, Arvind, and Uttara, you were talking about. The existing human capital, the funds, the innovation of this ever-changing sector needs to be leveraged strategically to be able to really create the impact that we all want. And collaborations can be just one avenue that we can pursue. And I'm sure that there will be many more. And I hope the attendees today have taken some of the learnings that all 4 of the panelists have shared, and will put in place some action plan of creating community-centric collaborations. Thank you so much, and everyone, at least in Maharashtra, have a good Ganpati. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.